Yo! Oh, 4K. Oh. I think while I'm eating my food, we should watch Hannibal.
After General Hasdrubal the Fair was assassinated, 26-year-old Hannibal was elected as the new Carthaginian commander.
He was elected. Oof.
The young general immediately made plans to invade Rome, but he couldn't begin the campaign before strengthening Carthage's control over the Iberian Peninsula. So Hannibal went to work. He launched two highly successful campaigns in 221 and 220 BC, extending Carthaginian influence beyond the Tagus River. But while on the return route to New Carthage, Hannibal was taken by surprise by a coalition of Iberian tribes. Led by the Carpetani tribe, the Iberians assembled a large army. They blocked Hannibal's path and fortified their position against the Tagus River, then waited for the Carthaginian general to attack. Here, Hannibal showed his military genius for the first time. Instead of attacking the Iberians head-on, he erected his own fortified camp and waited. By day's end, his scouts found a river crossing to the southeast. During the wee hours of the night, Hannibal ordered a small contingent to stay in the camp and keep all campfires burning, creating the illusion that the whole Carthaginian army was still encamped. Meanwhile, he led his army on a swift flanking maneuver further up the river. By sunrise the next day, Hannibal was behind the Iberian position, feigning retreat towards New Carthage. Thinking that the Carthaginians were retreating, the Iberians rushed to intercept them. But once they were midstream, Hannibal sprung his trap and unleashed his cavalry. Iberian infantrymen, chest-deep in the fast-flowing river, couldn't offer much resistance and were cut down with ease by the Carthaginian cavalry charge. Those who managed to cross were trampled by the elephants. By now the Iberian army lost all cohesion and the mass of tribal warriors started fleeing. Hannibal ordered his army to pursue them across the river, completely routing the enemy. On the Tagus River, Hannibal had his first major victory, but Rome took notice. Wanting to stop Hannibal's expansion, the Romans made their presence felt. Already allied with the wealthy and powerful city of Saguntum, Rome declared it their protectorate, an act that Hannibal perceived as a violation of the treaty signed by the two great powers in 225 BC, which divided the Iberian Peninsula along the Ebro River into Carthaginian and Roman spheres of influence. A sworn enemy of Rome, it didn't take long before Hannibal...
Let's be real, Rome was just looking for an excuse to stop Hannibal. They knew Hannibal's ambition, and they just knew that eventually they'll be pushing on their territory. So it's like, let's find an excuse so Hannibal can't push any further.
Hannibal acted. He marched on Saguntum and besieged the city. In 219 BC, the Carthaginian army reached the outskirts of Saguntum. The city was heavily fortified, situated atop steep slopes and cliffs, high above the surrounding plain, and placed most of his forces at the western end. Saguntines stubbornly kept pushing every Carthaginian assault back, but the siege went on for months, and the many assaults gradually wore down portions of the wall. Eventually, the defenders had to abandon their outer defenses and form up behind the inner wall. Slowly and relentlessly, Hannibal's army made progress. And after 8 brutal months, the Saguntines made their last stand
8 months?
at the citadel.
An 8-month siege?
Soon
I would
after,
lose my shit.
The city fell. Inhabitants that survived the siege were either killed or sold into slavery. After the fall of Saguntum, Rome demanded justice for what they perceived was the violation of the treaty, and, claiming that Saguntum was in the Roman sphere of influence according to the treaty, they asked Carthage to hand over Hannibal to Rome so he can be punished. But the Carthaginian Senate stood by their general, and by the end of the year, the Second Punic War began. Hannibal wintered in New Carthage, preparing for the upcoming campaign. He placed his brother Hasdrubal in charge of Iberia, with 15,000 troops and 21 elephants, along with a fleet of ships to protect the coastline. To break possible tribal allegiances, around 15,000 Iberian infantry...
Let's be real. Elephants in this era were a complete gimmick, weren't they? They were just something that were like huge, loud, and almost like annoying that can scare the enemy army. I feel like practically, when you look at it on the historical perspective, elephants were just like a big gimmick.
Were swapped for
They weren't that effective, put it that
15,000
way.
African infantry, who were more reliable, sending the Iberians to Carthage and Libya to bolster defenses against a possible Roman landing. And in the spring of 218 BC, with the full support from the Senate, Hannibal marched out of New Carthage with 54,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry, dividing his army into 3 columns. But beyond the Ebro, tribes allied to Rome were hostile to the Carthaginians, and it took Hannibal about 2 months to pacify the region. He placed around 10,000 troops under the command of Hanno, ordering him to establish a line of defense on the Ebro against possible incursions into Carthaginian territory. With 38,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants left at his disposal, Hannibal crossed the mountains and encamped on the other side of the Pyrenees. Meanwhile, the Romans divided their forces. Their plan was to send consul Publius Cornelius Scipio to intercept Hannibal in Iberia.
I love the names. Cornelius, Alcilius, Harmilius, Scipio.
Simultaneously, consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus sailed to Sicily, with the intent of attacking Carthage itself if Scipio managed to stop Hannibal's advance.
Longus.
Additional Roman forces were left to guard the recently conquered Gallic lands in the Po Valley, a region the Romans called Cisalpine Gaul. Back at the foot of the Pyrenees Mountains, Hannibal laid the groundwork for the invasion. Rather than fighting his way towards Rome, he did everything to avoid conflict with the Gallic tribes, mostly paying them for free passage through their territory, promising that his only interest is to fight Rome. Moreover, Carthaginian messengers returning from the Po Valley assured Hannibal that the Gallic tribes there would welcome him, and that they had already begun hostilities against Rome in anticipation of his arrival. This was welcome news for Hannibal, because he knew the Po Valley could provide more manpower and act as a staging point for operations into Roman territory. As Hannibal approached the River Rhone, Scipio's army disembarked at Massalia to resupply, while on their way to Iberia. The Roman general knew that Hannibal crossed the Pyrenees, but he wrongly estimated that the Carthaginian general was still far from the Rhone. In truth, Hannibal's army was only 4 days' march away from Massalia. Hannibal rested his army for 3 days in hostile territory and began preparations to cross the Rhone. With the Roman army just 4 days away, Hannibal wanted to avoid a set-piece battle with the Gauls, eager to press on towards the Italian peninsula as soon as possible. But on the opposite riverbank, encamped was the army of the Cavaras tribe, a Roman ally. They gathered all their boats and built a barrier on the riverbank, in preparation to contest the Carthaginian crossing. But Hannibal devised a cunning plan.
Oh, that was a ship.
On the 3rd night, under the cover of darkness...
Pay attention to this, because Hannibal does this in every single battle. He'll have some reserves, and he'll hide them somewhere. Ambush, maybe? No, ambush certainty. You're fighting against Hannibal.
He sent a flanking detachment under the command of Hanno, son of Bomilcar. Some 40 kilometers, 25 miles, north. Hanno crossed the river and rested his troops for one day. On the second night after leaving the Carthaginian camp, Hanno's detachment again moved during the night, eventually deploying behind the Cavares camp at dawn. The trap was set. Early next morning, Hanno used smoke to signal Hannibal to start crossing the Rhone. As the Carthaginian vessels were lowered into the massive river, Cavares' army formed a line on the opposite riverbank. Hannibal was one of the first to cross, to the roars and cheers from his men on the western bank. As the Carthaginians started disembarking on the eastern riverbank, Hanno sent a part of his force to loot and destroy
Just in time for the ambush
camp, while he personally led the charge against the Gauls near the river. The Cavares were stunned by the flanking maneuver, and they began fleeing the field in panic, unable to cope with Hannibal's perfectly synchronized attacks. With the Gauls scattered, the battle was soon over, and the Carthaginians hastily proceeded to cross the river. Most of Hannibal's troops crossed the Rhone by the end of the day, while it took another day to get the elephants across the river. While the Carthaginian army gathered on the eastern bank, friendly Gallic messengers from...
Well, you must be really frustrating to have an objective in your mind. Like, I'm going to destroy Rome. I'm going to crush the Roman Republic. And he just said that he had to wait one day for the army to cross and another day for the elephants to cross. I can't describe how mind-numbingly annoying that must be.
From the tribes in the Po Valley arrived, warning Hannibal that a Roman fleet is anchored nearby. Hannibal sent his scouts to locate Scipio's army, and, incredibly, not long after, his Numidian scouts stumbled into a Roman Gallic scouting party. Both generals now knew of each other's whereabouts. Scipio quickly moved north to confront Hannibal, but by the time the Romans reached the crossing point a few days later, only an empty Carthaginian camp was left behind. Hannibal had no time to waste. He had to reach the Alps before the winter. But trouble was brewing in Iberia. Scipio placed his brother, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus, in charge of leading the army into Iberia, while he headed back to the Po Valley to assume command of Roman troops there and prepare for the Carthaginian invasion. Scipio Calvus, now in charge of the invasion force, disembarked at Emporiae. The Greek trading cities and the Iberian tribes in the region welcomed the Romans. But even prior to the arrival of Roman troops, the Carthaginians began to lose control over the conquered region, as Hanno's force wasn't large enough to conduct offensive operations. What's worse, Hanno only learned about the Roman arrival when Scipio Calvus was well on his way towards the Ebro River.
Scipio.
He sent word to Hasdrubal, who began marching north with 8,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. But instead of waiting for Hasdrubal, Hanno marched out with 10,000 troops to meet the 20...
Yeah, I just thought about something as well. The elephants, they're like tanks, aren't they? You need a certain bridge that can maintain their weight, and you also need a bridge that's wide enough for them to walk across it. So technically, they would have to be building bridges as they went.
With 8,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. But instead of waiting for Hasdrubal, Hanno marched out with 10,000 troops to meet the 20,000-strong Roman army. Scipio Calvus easily crushed the Carthaginians, killing 6,000 and capturing 2,000 troops, along with Hanno himself. Once Hasdrubal arrived, he didn't have enough troops to meet the Romans in battle, so he launched fast-moving raids along the coast. Carthaginian raiders killed many Roman sailors as they were foraging, reducing the effectiveness of the Roman fleet by half. Nevertheless, Rome now had full control over Iberia, north of the Ebro River, a serious blow to the Carthaginian war effort. Moreover, northern Iberia would become a base of operations for Roman incursions into Carthaginian territory south of the Ebro River. Meanwhile, having marched his forces over the Alps, Hannibal would soon turn the Italian peninsula into a war zone in a campaign that would
Marching the
elevate him to a
elephants
general
over the
of
Alps.
legendary
Crazy,
status.
man.
South to invade Carthage itself. Hannibal. In God's tribe, by adjudicating in a dispute between two royal brothers over who should rule. The seemingly grateful new ruler of the tribe, Brancus the Elder, provides the Carthaginians with supplies, warm clothes, food, and guides. And so begins Hannibal's perilous journey through the Alps. But as the ascent begins, Brancus's friendly guides turn home. Here, Hannibal shows he is as skillful in mind games as he is in generalship. Sensing an ambush, he sends scouts ahead who report that the tribesmen are indeed mustering their forces just
You can't ambush her. You can't ambush an ambusher, right? Right?
ahead on higher ground near their settlement, waiting to attack the passing Carthaginian column. With a select group of experienced troops, Hannibal sneaks up to a position overlooking the tribal settlement and plans his next move. As night falls, he signals his army to proceed marching. Spotting the movement, tribal sentries raise the alarm.
That whistle
and,
sound effect.
just as Hannibal had hoped, an attack begins on the Carthaginian column. Expecting the impending attack, Carthaginian troops below stand fast on the precipice. A swarm of tribal warriors smashes into their solid defensive line, the initial push throwing many over the cliff's edge.
Elephant.
But the Carthaginians hold their ground, and the tribesmen soon realize that they have fallen.
If you think about it, ambushes are so effective within this era because before battle, you'd make sure the soldiers are well rested. They've warmed up. Don't think about that, do you? In a medieval setting or an ancient setting, soldiers doing stretches to warm up and whatnot. Elements of like if they've eaten or not prior to battle, so they're gonna have the energy to actually fight. And an ambush is so effective because one, they're probably not even holding their shield or their sword. It's probably sheathed away. It might even be on a pack mule behind them. They might not be carrying a weapon with them. They're not warmed up. They've not eaten. They've not well rested. So an ambush is going to be so unbelievably effective. And that's why you hear in history like these ideas of like they attack a camp of an army and they completely massacre the entire army in the camp. They barely even put up a fight. Just for that sole reason, all those elements I've just listed.
Fallen into a trap. Hannibal rushes downhill, while Carthaginian troops from below simultaneously begin pushing uphill. Many tribesmen are cut down in a matter of minutes. Their morale broke.
Oh, got a morale too. Normally, before you go into battle, your officer, your general, your leader will give you a motivational speech to tell you what's going to happen, how it's going to work, and how we're going to win this. And this will motivate your guys to fight really hard and well. If you think about it, you never have an opportunity to boost morale prior to battle if it's an ambush. It's basically going to come out of nowhere.
By the lightning-fast Carthaginian counterattack. With the enemy driven off, Hannibal and his men turn their attention towards the village. They storm the tribal settlement and seize all of their winter provisions. At dawn, the Carthaginian march resumes. Over the following 3 days, the marching column continues unopposed.
So if you think about it, in that instance, even though Hannibal had his most experienced troops at the back to flank them, but think about it too, he told his officers in the army, like, by the way, be aware of an ambush and make sure your guys are prepared for it. It's more likely going to be coming. So in that case, you guys are going to be so much more prepared to withstand the impact of someone flanking you in the mountains.
All that changes on the 4th day, as the Carthaginians enter a narrow gorge, where they are met by several tribal chiefs who offer friendship, hostages, and guides. Suspecting that the Gallic tribes from these parts are no friendlier, Hannibal accepts their offer, but takes precautions by secretly moving the vulnerable baggage train and cavalry to the front of the column, and positions his heavy infantry in the rear.
He knows. Can't ambush an ambusher Anti-ambush ambusher.
As the Carthaginian march continues through the extremely narrow pass, the 200-meter vertical cliffs ominously tower over them. And they are not alone. The Gallic warriors are watching from above. Having set up an ambush further up the gorge, the tribesmen bide their time, shadowing Hannibal's army for 2 days. But suddenly, at a very narrow point in the gorge, the Carthaginian column gets blocked from the front.
This is the one advantage that they have over the Carthaginians here. They know the terrain, they know the Alps, they know all the maps, the choke points, the rivers, the mountain ranges, the high points, the low points. And in this case, that's why Hannibal needs a guide to help him. But
front as the tribesmen unleash their attack. Rocks and projectiles rain down from the cliffs above onto the Carthaginians below, killing many in the process. Animals panic and trample over soldiers who hopelessly look for cover. The main Gallic force appears behind the Carthaginian column and charges their rear, expecting weakest resistance there as they hope to loot and destroy their supply train.
Look at this wide boy.
But again, Hannibal proves he is one step ahead of his opponents, as the heavy Carthaginian infantry he previously placed in the rear pushes back the Gallic charge and inflicts heavy losses on the enemy, forcing them to retreat.
I don't even think these would have been proper soldiers, you know. I think these are going to be like hunters and tribesmen and stuff like that. So these are going to be expecting an easy ride, and they're going to come across a fully trained, like, Carthaginian heavy infantry and going to get absolutely massacred.
After a brief battle.
40 widths, yeah. They have 7 widths, and he 40 width Carthaginian
Hannibal
infantry.
then urges his men to push forward out of the killing zone as the barrage of rocks from above continues. It is not until 1 day later that the Carthaginians finally reach safety on the other side of the gorge. The last of the Allobrosia's attacks is beaten off, but the remorseless fighting against the Gallic tribes took its toll on Hannibal's army.
Oh no,
to make
low battery.
matters worse, the weather soon turns as winter comes early. Hannibal's troops find themselves battling heavy snowstorms. Traversing through rocky gorges and steep mountain slopes, many are swallowed by treacherous voids lurking just under the snowfall. Men, animals, and wagons slip and slither on the ice towards precipitous ravines and treacherous chasms. Finally, 9 days into the march, the Carthaginians set up...
Isn't the safest route across the coast? I know why Hannibal's going through the mountains, because he wants the element of surprise. But I assume the safest route would have been across the coast, wouldn't it?
Camp just below the top of the pass as they wait for stragglers to catch up. 2 days later, Hannibal rallies his troops at the top and points to the panorama of Italy below. There he vows to his men, "You will have the capital of Italy, the citadel of Rome, in the hollow of your hands." And with that, they begin descending towards the Po Valley. But the slopes on the way down are far steeper and largely covered in ice. The treacherous terrain claims the lives of many more troops and animals. Adding to the hardship, a collapsed stretch of road forces the Carthaginian column to stop for 3 days amidst freezing conditions while the road is repaired. But finally, after braving these horrific conditions, the Carthaginians reach the foot of the Alps. Having lost nearly half of his army, Hannibal takes stock of his troops who suffered terribly during the crossing. Of the 45,000 that set off through the Alps just 16 days ago, only 26,000 made it to the other side. There, the Roman army awaits.
Still got all their elephants, though.
But before he begins rebuilding his army is only barely equal in size to a single Roman consular army. And as soon as his troops are rested, he quickly moves to secure the loyalty of Gallic tribes. Or at least compliance cannot be guaranteed by flattery and gifts, who resisted the Carthaginian advance. After a 3-day siege, he orders his troops to storm the main town of the Torini. All of the inhabitants, men, women, and children, are massacred.
Damn.
This calculated display of ruthlessness serves to show the Gallic tribes what is the price of hostility to the Carthaginian cause. Meanwhile, on the waves off the coast of Sicily, the Carthaginians strike the first blow. In preparation for a full-scale invasion to take back the important port cities that they once held, their ships begin raiding strategic islands around Sicily.
Oh, this is boring.
While spotted ally demon but that their ships are not packed with many ships with twice.
The TLDR is that the Carthaginians actually had more ships in around Sicily than the Romans, but the Romans packed their ships like twice as many men. So when they rammed and boarded the Carthaginian ships, they completely annihilated them.
North. Publius. With his 17-year-old son at his side, also named Publius, who will later become known as Scipio Africanus, Scipio crosses the river Po at Placentia and promptly continues west along the northern bank of the Po.
The Po.
Under his command are mostly less experienced troops, but Scipio is confident of defeating Hannibal. After all, in Scipio's view, he challenged Hannibal on the Rhone, and the Carthaginian general ran away. Hannibal, on the other hand, is quite surprised to learn that Scipio made it back to the Po Valley so quickly. He thinks that Scipio returned with his entire army, but he has no way of knowing that in fact Scipio's troops continued on to Iberia. Thinking that the Romans now have 2 whole armies in the Po Valley, the Carthaginian general fears that this force is now strong enough to deter Gallic tribes from joining him, and he wants a victory, fast. Hannibal knows that the Gallic tribes will not rally to his...
I think the one thing that's interesting is how it isn't all decided by these open pitch battles. How a lot of it is psychological and building morale and trying to win small victories to try and convince tribes around him to join his cause. Like, it's almost a morale, psychological game, recruiting, and less about just winning these open pitch big battles.
His banner if he doesn't seem confident of defeating Rome. Not wasting any time, he marches his army downstream along the northern bank of the Po River to meet Scipio. Still unaware of each other's exact whereabouts, the 2 generals send scouting parties well ahead of their respective armies as they march towards each other. Each army's scouts soon report the enemy's presence, and both Hannibal and Scipio proceed with caution. The Romans build a pontoon bridge over the Tichinus River and set up camp on the western bank. Meanwhile, some 15 kilometers west, the Carthaginian column also stops and encamps for the night on the flat plain. A day later, both Hannibal and Scipio ride out in force to scout the area in person, each of them eager to gain a crucial early victory, which would inspire the rest of their troops and win support of the Gallic tribes. Hannibal rides with the bulk of his horsemen, while Scipio has all of his cavalry and a small force of Velitus with him. As the 2 contingents move through the flat plain, they soon spot each other because of the clouds of dust thrown up by the hooves of their horses. Both generals decide to deploy their troops for battle. Hannibal arrays his close-order Spanish cavalry in the front and forms the Numidian light cavalry in 2 groups behind the first line. Scipio places his Velitus in the front, aiming to soften up Hannibal's cavalry with javelin throws. Gallic allies form the second line, while the Roman cavalry is in reserve. As both contingents begin closing the distance, Hannibal sees that the Roman cavalry is fewer in number and makes a split-second decision not to engage in skirmishing with the Roman Velitus. Instead, he orders a full-blooded charge against the Roman front line. Scipio quickly responds by leading his cavalry forward, as the Velitus withdraw through the gaps to form a second line, without even managing a single javelin volley due to the onrushing Carthaginians.
I think it's insane. Like, once again, we have to... it's hard to climb inside the mind of the historian that wrote this down and then and then understood at that time what Hannibal was exactly thinking. I guess a lot of it is up to interpretation because no one really knows what Hannibal was thinking. And then the historian that wrote it down, and then the second and third or fourth hand accounts of it been passed down. So we really don't know 100% what actually did happen. But let's just presume that we did. And in this scenario, the idea that Hannibal read as he was marching forward to clash with the Roman troops, he read at that exact moment that he saw that the Romans were trying to delay for time and trying to wither down his army by javelin throws and missiles. And he decided, let's just do a full-blown attack because they're trying to buy time. I mean, that must have been an insane decision to make just on the fly at that exact moment. That could have been, it had to be made within 10 minutes, wouldn't it? Like that decision, like I can see they're trying to buy for time. Let's not let them buy for time. Let's charge.
A few moments later, the cavalry clashes in the center. A fierce, bloody, static melee develops, unlike the usual mobile cavalry encounters of the time. The horse...
It's not only the fact that they wrote it down weeks or months later. It's also that it may be third or fourth accounts of the people. It might be a person story from someone else, a story from someone else, from someone else. It might be so many layers deep that the stories become so convoluted. You don't even really know what the actual events were accurately.
Horses panic in the chaotic close quarters fighting, and many horsemen dismount in order to fight more effectively on foot. For a while, the fighting seems indecisive, but this was another ruse by Hannibal. He waits until most of the Roman cavalry is fully committed and then sends his Numidians on a flanking maneuver.
Was that a Willem scream there?
The Roman cavalry is fully committed and then sends his Numidians on a flanking maneuver. This catches the Romans totally by surprise. Velitus on the flanks spot the envelopment and some of them panic and flee. The fast Numidian cavalry quickly flows around the Roman flanks and tramples over the scattered light infantry. And then the noose begins to tighten around the Roman contingent. In the melee, Scipio is struck down from his horse.
Oh no.
Carthaginian troops close in to finish off the wounded general, but at the final moment he is rescued. One early account of his rescue holds that a Ligurian slave saved the Roman consul.
See what I mean? That makes a good story, doesn't it? The fact that it was the highest of Roman elites was saved by a lowly slave. It's very poetic when it's told as a story, but you think that actually is what happened? I think that's the reason why stories like Robin Hood were carried on through the generations, because it gave people who had nothing, the peasants, something to strive for, something to live for. The idea that you were born into serfdom, but you somehow managed to become something. And those stories are quite inspirational. And probably a lot of stories that were passed on through the peasants probably had those same kind of morals to the story, that you can eventually become something.
But the more popular version claims that his 17-year-old son Publius charged to rescue...
Publius. Think about that for a second. He called his son Publius. Publius.
His father with a small group of Roman cavalry that clustered around the consul before retreating back towards the Roman camp. As word of Hannibal...
Thank you, Publius. I named you well.
...victory spreads,
thank you for saving
Gallic
me.
tribes send emissaries to pledge their support. But despite their promises, the Gauls deliver little in the way of reinforcements and supplies during this early stage of the war. This forces Hannibal, whose army goes critically low on food in late 218 BC, to send a cavalry contingent to capture a Roman grain depot at Clastidium, guarded by a Roman garrison. Luckily for Hannibal, the garrison commander is from Brundisium in southern Italy, and when confronted he willingly surrenders the depot and, in return for 400 gold pieces, joins the Carthaginian ranks together with the entire garrison.
Mercs.
These troops become the first of the Italian allies to defect and join Hannibal. Meanwhile, the Roman army retreats to Placentia, where they plan to wait for Sempronius and his consular army. Although the defeat at the river Ticinus is far from a major loss, it nevertheless reinforces the apprehension with which the Romans would view Hannibal from now on, and it sets a psychological tone which would be felt in the much larger battles to come. After the defeat at Ticinus, the Roman Senate in the fact that Hannibal has yet to face the vaunted Roman infantry, long as his arrival to northern Italy restores confidence. Hannibal now faces armies of both Roman consuls.
Hannibal Bacra.
It's early December 218 BC. Publius Scipio's life still hangs in the balance due to wounds he sustained at Ticinus. But, ironically, his troubles are only just starting. His defeat at Ticinus has major consequences for Rome. It directly caused the garrison at Clastidium to surrender the town's massive grain depot. This strips his army of food reserves and disrupts his supply lines, making any advance into enemy territory a risky venture. At the same time, Hannibal finally replenishes his own reserves, which were dwindling ever since he descended from the Alps, right until the clash at Ticinus just a few days ago. The damage to Roman prestige raises the danger of further defections. What's worse, Gallic tribes are flocking to join Hannibal, enthused by his ability to defeat the Romans and his softer administrative touch. Scipio has no option but to retreat, realizing he is deep in hostile territory. He marches to Placentia and makes camp across the Po River. Hannibal pursues and catches up 2 days later. Learning of his arrival, over 2,000 Gauls allied to Rome rise up in the camp and attack Roman soldiers, killing many in their sleep. Before sunrise, they cross the Trebia to join Hannibal, bringing with them the severed heads of slain Romans. Using the Gallic defection as propaganda, Hannibal makes sure to spread the word that Rome's allies are joining him en masse, thereby boosting his popularity among the tribes. Scipio again moves south, not wanting to risk being caught in the open. A day later, he reaches the hills and sets up camp in a strong position, with hills protecting his flanks from cavalry attacks.
So they're in the north here, Alpine Gaul, which is a region that Rome had only conquered in the last 50 years. So that the Gauls that lived here weren't, well, one, they weren't Romans, and then two, they weren't loyal to Rome as such. They were classed as occupied, conquered peoples. So in this territory, the Carthaginians are seen as more favorably as like liberators, where the Romans are kind of put down because they're seen as the conquerors.
Then he settles in and waits for reinforcements. By mid-December, the two consuls join forces. Discussing how to confront Hannibal, Scipio argues against taking the field, stressing that Longus's troops lack experience and need additional training, having been raised less than a year ago. Longus disagrees and sets up camp a few kilometers north from Scipio's position. Just as eager to fight as Longus, Hannibal maintains his camp on the flat plain and surveys the potential battlefield west of the Trebia River. Meanwhile, he sends a raiding party to ravage the area along the river, suspecting that Gallic tribes living there, who pledged allegiance to him, are now negotiating with the Romans. It's unclear if the Gauls intended to betray Hannibal, but with their villages now being raided, some of the tribesmen appeal to the Romans for help. Longus promptly sends 1,000 Velitus across the river to attack the raiders. With Hannibal's troops scattered across the area and encumbered by plunder, Roman troops start picking off small groups of Carthaginians, quickly routing the raiders. Seeing this, troops on duty outside Hannibal's camp rush to the aid of the retreating raiding party. The fighting is fierce, as both sides want to prove their superiority, but the Roman Velitus are soon forced into a fighting retreat. The skirmish escalates rapidly, spreading across a large area. More and more troops from each side join in. Pockets of clashes develop as neither side is able to shore up its ranks. It becomes apparent that the chaotic skirmish might turn into a full-scale battle that neither commander will be able to control. Hannibal takes the initiative. He stops sending more troops into the fray, trying to avoid a battle that he did not plan and can do little to influence. He then audaciously rides out in person and rallies the scattered troops. He pulls them back and arrays them in a line outside the camp. The Romans advance, but Hannibal restrains his men from charging the enemy. The Romans too halt their advance, refusing to attack the well-positioned Carthaginians, who can now be supported from the camp with projectiles and fresh troops. The day draws to a close. Hannibal demonstrates his shrewdness by not committing to an uncertain battle, and by restraining his troops, he exhibits what he would become so famous for: his extraordinary ability to exercise control over his army. Romans retire towards their camp, satisfied at scoring a victory against Hannibal's troops, their morale and confidence partially restored. Longus, who is described by sources as having an aggressive temperament, shows his eagerness to do battle as soon as possible. He won't have to wait long. At dawn, Roman guards sound the alarm. The Carthaginians are attacking the camp. Awoken to projectiles flying over the palisades, Roman troops are ordered to get ready for battle. On empty stomachs, the men rush to form up in front of their tents in frigid conditions. Longus sends all 4,000 of his cavalry against the Numidians, closely followed by 6,000 Velitus. But the Numidians soon break off. As the fighting moves north, the fast cavalrymen engage in hit-and-run attacks. Longus marches out with the rest of his army to meet the enemy. Heavy infantry forms into 3 columns, each some 3.5 kilometers long. They lag behind the cavalry and Velitus, but make steady progress. Numidians continue to avoid a direct confrontation with the Roman cavalry and Velitus. Meanwhile, Hannibal gathers his officers to lay out his plans. He offers words of encouragement.
You know, I know when you guys watch this, you probably feel really inspired that you want to play Total War after this. But one thing I will say is that it's kind of restrictive in a way in Total War, how you really don't get the ability to do a lot of this kind of stuff. Like, you don't get to raid camps, you don't get to really do ambushes and stuff. You know, like, most of the part, it's just one-on-one battles over and over and over again, isn't it?
Encouragement and orders them to ready the men for battle. Well rested and well fed, Carthaginian troops take to the field. To the east, the skirmish continues. Numidians find themselves backed against the Trebia. They start crossing the river as they continue to pull back, pursued by the Romans. Arriving with the infantry and eager for battle, Longus orders the army to deploy on the western bank. The 3 columns begin crossing, chest deep in the freezing water. Meanwhile, Hannibal sends 8,000 infantry forward to support the Numidian retreat and to provide a screen for his own deployment. He then moves his main line about 1 kilometer towards the approaching Romans. Across the field, Longus's army takes several hours to deploy. After fording the cold Trebia, his men are hungry, soaked, and standing in the near-freezing temperature. The Roman consul places his Velitus in the front, forms his veteran infantry in the center, with Gallic and allied infantry on either side, and cavalry on the flanks. Hannibal deploys his infantry in a thin line. Gallic allies in the center, with Spanish and Libyan infantry on either side. Elephants flank the infantry, while the Numidian and Gallic cavalry is further wide. Around noon...
See, what's surprising at the minute is, like, a lot of Hannibal's army isn't even Carthaginian anymore. It's like, very multicultural.
Longus orders his entire line...
I know the Romans are as well, to a certain degree, but not the same level that Carthage is.
...to advance, confident in the clear numerical advantage of his heavy infantry. The Romans advance in good order. The flat plain, free of any obstacles, seems an ideal battleground for their style of warfare. Meanwhile, Hannibal holds the line, letting the enemy come to him. Skirmishers get into range and begin exchanging projectiles. With Balearic slingers in their ranks, combining with javelin men, the Carthaginians quickly gain the upper hand against the Roman Velitus, who used up many of their javelins while pursuing the Numidian cavalry earlier in the day. Skirmishers from both sides withdraw through the gaps as the main lines of infantry close in. The heavier, more compact Roman infantry pushes the Carthaginian line back, causing heavy casualties to Hannibal's Gallic infantry in the center. On the flanks, Hannibal orders his cavalry to push forward. Some of the Roman horses become frightened by Hannibal's elephants, causing disruption within the ranks. But groups of Roman Velitus, specially trained to deal with elephants, mix with the cavalry and attack the terrifying beasts, wounding and killing many. Eventually, the Numidians manage to overwhelm and advance against the Roman cavalry. But despite Roman flanks being pushed back,
you notice this with Alexander the Great as well. You notice a lot of his major battles that he won were all down to his mobility and use of cavalry, and you seem to notice that with Hannibal as well.
The Carthaginian center is crumbling. Veteran legionnaires are hacking through the Gallic infantry. Without any reinforcements available, it seems that Hannibal cannot stop the onslaught. But what the Romans don't know is that while surveying the field on the eve of battle, Hannibal personally picked 2,000 elite troops and positioned them in a dry riverbed, hidden from view. Now, they emerge from the ravine with perfect timing, just as the Numidians finally rout the Roman cavalry, poised to encircle the enemy. Hard pressed from the front by elephants, Carthaginian infantry and skirmishers, the wings of the Roman infantry buckle as the Numidians attack their rear. Meanwhile, Hannibal's center collapses as the veteran Roman heavy infantry cuts right through the Carthaginian line, still unaffected by the encirclement thanks to their discipline and organization. However, realizing the battle is lost, the legionnaires retreat back across the river to Placentia, maintaining their battle formation. Roman casualties are heavy, likely around 28,000 dead or wounded, while the Carthaginian losses are much lower, between 3,000 and 5,000. Losing most of his elephants, possibly all but one, is the only major loss for Hannibal at Trebia. In just a matter of weeks, Hannibal outperformed both Roman consuls with superior planning, near-perfect coordination, and control of his troops. News of the defeat rocks the Roman Senate and causes widespread panic among the population. The damage to Roman prestige persuades many more Gauls to join Hannibal. Additional attacks on Roman outposts and towns cause further disruption, before cold weather finally forces armies of both sides into winter quarters. But as Hannibal's devastating campaign in Italy gains momentum, a seemingly minor event in Iberia could threaten the Carthaginian war effort in the long run. The Roman armament March victory, Gnaenclave, outnumbered to full his any months, suffering the take
we don't want to hear about this stuff in Iberia. Boring.
Months about
came here for Hannibal.
And leads the ground with the rest. First in with his ships following them into to deal and Virginia. The Romans to the right. Gnaenclave, 4 ships in they realize they make plans to send reinforcements to Iberia under the command of Gnaeus' brother Pubert from Credit goes to our awesome patrons who make videos.
Oh man, that was really boring. And the fact that the last episode was just something that happened in Iberia. So basically, in Sicily, they lost. In Iberia, they lost. But everything that Hannibal touches turned to gold.
Struck fear. The vast marshlands of the Arno River in the west, thought to be impassable during winter and spring due to flooding, and the rugged Apennine mountain range cutting across the peninsula, the Romans know that there are only 2 routes into central Italy that Hannibal can take, and they move to block both. Consul Gaius Flaminius positions his army at Arretium, including the 10,000 legionnaires that survived the Battle of Trebia. His co-consul, Gnaeus Servilius Geminus, is stationed at Ariminum. Both armies are bolstered with a higher number of horsemen than usual, perhaps to offset their numerical inferiority in cavalry. Hannibal, meanwhile, has problems of his own. While he did establish a base of operations in the Po Valley, Gallic support will weaken over time as his army continues to consume their resources. At the same time, the Romans decided not to pursue further battles in the north, so staying there makes little sense for Hannibal. He needs to put pressure on the Romans before his Gallic allies lose interest in the war. Just like the Senate, Hannibal knows that he can either go down the Adriatic coast and fight Servilius in the rugged terrain of Picenum, or he can fight Flaminius in the difficult Apennine mountain passes. Neither route is good. Whichever he chose, not only would the Romans be alerted about his movement ahead of time, but he would be forced into a prolonged and uncertain battle against the well-defended Roman positions, which would allow time for the two consular armies to link up, something that Hannibal can ill afford. But with the arrival of warm spring weather, the Carthaginian general does the unexpected. He decides to force march his army across the Apennine Mountains and through the dangerous marshlands of the Arno River, aiming to surprise the two consuls and get into a good position to threaten Rome itself. The plan is arguably just as audacious as was the crossing of the Alps. The march is extremely difficult. Hannibal places his most disciplined infantry, the hard-marching Libyans and Iberians, at the head of the column. They set a fast pace, which the Gauls find difficult to maintain, as they are not used to forced marches. And by being at the back of the column, they face the added difficulty of having to march through the sticky quagmire that has been churned up by the troops in front of them. The cavalry is in the rear of the column, ushering the Gauls forward and keeping an eye on any who might decide to turn back. The terrain, however, is the army's biggest enemy. The Arno River flooded after winter rains, turning the river basin into heavily flooded, muddy wetlands. The endless, dense swampland offers almost no dry areas for resting. Hannibal's troops wade through deep pools of water for 4 days and 3 nights, with almost no sleep and no rest, whilst carrying their heavy equipment and supplies. Those fortunate enough to be mounted are able to sleep in their saddles, while a handful of those on foot manage to climb onto the bodies of dead horses and pack animals for a brief rest. Many die to infection, disease, exhaustion, and drowning. Hannibal himself catches an eye infection, which cannot be treated because there is no time to stop the column during the forced march, and he carries the infection for much of the journey, eventually losing sight in one eye.
Damn.
He emerges from the swamp on the back of his sole surviving elephant, probably the brave Syrian. All the while, the Romans assumed that Hannibal is contained in the north. But what they didn't know is that the Carthaginian general managed to cross the Apennine Mountains and the Arno River wetlands with 50,000 troops in just 4 days.
Damn.
All without being detected, and is now in position for the next stage of his campaign. He grants his army a few days to rest and sends scouting parties south. He learns that Flaminius is at Arretium and that the Etrurian plain can offer enough food and plunder to boost the morale of the troops. Having learned that Flaminius is an arrogant and rash commander, he plans to provoke him into giving battle by pillaging and burning the rich Etrurian countryside. Soon enough, plumes of smoke from burning villages and fields dot the land west of Arretium, followed by the Carthaginian column passing right next to Flaminius, brazenly taunting the Roman general.
Damn.
Watching from Arretium, Flaminius is fuming, knowing that it is he who is supposed to protect these lands, and yet one of the richest areas in Italy is burning on his watch. But he somehow resists challenging the Carthaginian general, persuaded by his advisors to stay put and wait until Servilius joins him. Unable to force an open battle, for Hannibal, an assault on Arretium is out of the question. He cannot risk losing too many of his experienced soldiers that he cannot replace. His army also has limited supplies and has to keep moving. Furthermore, Hannibal has no way of knowing how far the other Roman army is, and as far as he knows, Servilius could be arriving any day now. So the Carthaginian general decides to press on. Leaving not one, but two armies in his rear must have seemed mad. But actually, by bypassing Arretium, Hannibal maintains the initiative and keeps the Romans guessing. He wants to be the one who dictates the course of the campaign. But scouts soon bring good news. Flaminius decided not to wait for Servilius after all. Knowing that the battle is soon coming, Hannibal makes sure to let his Gallic troops know that they will be fighting against Flaminius, the man who caused them much misery in years past. Flaminius is renowned for his victories against Gallic tribes. He is responsible for introducing a law that allowed Romans to settle near and on Gallic lands. This created conflict, which Flaminius resolved by invading and occupying more Gallic lands, and then proceeded to settle more Romans on the lands he conquered. Needless to say, he is hated by the Gauls, and the 17,000 of them in Hannibal's army can't wait to get their hands on him. Meanwhile, for the Roman army that prides itself on its military prowess, it must be humiliating to pass through villages and countryside. But Flaminius can still redeem himself, and he is only one day's march away.
It's the lake, boys. Here we go.
It's early morning of June 24th, 217 BC. Flaminius marches out of his camp
On a completely unrelated note, but I bet this is a really nice place to go on holiday.
towards the smoke rising in the distance, apparently from Carthaginian campfires, eager to get to grips with the enemy. In the front, he places veteran legionnaires that survived the Battle of Trebia, who are also very keen on meeting the enemy in battle.
Oh no.
As the column moves, a low-hanging mist envelops the lake and the valley.
Not the mist.
The shoreline is eerily quiet. The locals seem to have vanished. Unable to see too far ahead, the Romans literally stumble into Hannibal's heavy infantry, who are blocking the road. Fighting spontaneously erupts at the far end of the valley. Despite being surprised by the enemy, the Roman vanguard forms up in battle formation. Further back, it is some time before the Roman center and rear realize what is happening in the front. The visibility is hampered by the low-hanging morning mist. But in the hills above the mist, Hannibal's hidden troops can clearly see the Roman column. Although they do not know it yet, the Romans walked straight into an ambush. But let's take a moment to consider how difficult it was to set up the ambush at Lake Trazamine. Hannibal couldn't just send his troops up the hill to their positions. That would have left tracks all over the hillside. And with Flaminius hot on his heels, he didn't have much time either. Yet Hannibal marched to the eastern end of the valley and somehow managed...
One thing that's really surprising is if you put a lot of people... I mean, this is the best example. You know, like, how a path's formed. A path's are formed because multiple people walk around that path on a daily basis or weekly basis. So eventually, plants won't grow there because they get trampled over time. And eventually, a path forms. It's like human beings inadvertently make paths by just simply walking on them. So that's the kind of impact it has on the ground when multiple human beings walk over a certain location. And the best example is music festivals. You like wedge in tens of thousands of people within a very small condensed area, and you make them walk over paths over and over and over again till it churns up the ground over and over and over again. So can you imagine the hooves of tens of thousands of horses walking over a set area and the amount it would churn up the ground? So this is the reason why he chose not to move them right up the hill directly from the path, because he knew it would have chewed up all the ground. It would have made it blatantly obvious that something had happened here where they would have moved uphill. I don't know, man. It's genius if you think about it.
To coordinate tens of thousands of troops around the hills to the north into their correct positions. At night, all within a brief window of time, and without arousing any suspicion. This is without doubt quite an astonishing military feat. Now, Hannibal signals his hidden forces to attack. It's unclear if trumpets signaled the start of the attack, or if his
This is a big blunder by the Romans, isn't it? Because this is higher ground too. You'd think their scouts would eventually go to higher ground and be able to spot them. Unless they're very far away, you know? That's the only conclusion, isn't it? They must be an incredibly long distance away to not get detected. Because otherwise, the scouts would have found them, and surely they sent out scouting parties to the higher ground to check.
Captains were ordered to wait until
especially when they know that Hannibal is renowned for ambushes as well.
Romans are deep enough in the valley. Whatever the case, the ambush succeeds completely. The use of campfires in the distance tricked the Romans into moving deep into the valley, thinking that the Carthaginians are further ahead. And by masterfully hiding tens of thousands of his troops in the hills, Hannibal completely surrounded.
Oh, and I think that's what they had to go to this campsite as well and start fires, to send up fires to lure the Romans down the valley. Oh,
the enemy.
Oh, God.
Coming seemingly out of nowhere, Numidian cavalry and Gallic heavy infantry engaged the Roman rear,
He was angry,
closing off their line of retreat. Hannibal's light infantry, skirmishers and Gallic heavy infantry clash with the Roman center. Having previously marched in a very loose formation, Flaminius's army is caught completely by surprise. They soon find themselves in a fight for their life. Their formations break up, and many soldiers...
I wonder if from a Roman perspective, this was not seen as chivalrous to fight in a manner that wasn't like a pitched battle between mano a mano, you know? And the idea that Hannibal just caught them off guard completely because he wasn't going to fight in a gentlemanly fashion. He was going to look for any opportunity he could to get an upper hand.
Are left to fend for themselves. The fighting is so fierce that none of the combatants notice a strong, nearby earthquake. After less than an hour of fighting, Hannibal's troops split apart the disorganized enemy column. From this point on, the battle becomes a slaughter. Numidians and Gauls overwhelm the Roman rear.
Isn't it again? I can't even think it was. Start again. In Total War, isn't it like if you kill the enemy army, annihilate them completely, and it's not even a contest? It's not even called a total war, total victory. It's something like a slaughter or something, or a massacre or something. Can't remember what that game is.
Forcing them all the way to the lakeshore. Many try to swim in their heavy armor, desperate to get away. According to Polybius, many Romans drown in the lake, while others who manage to stay afloat beg for mercy, but are killed then and there.
Damn.
The Roman center fights a brave last stand, but after another 2 hours of fighting, most of Flaminius's men are cut down, while others drown in the lake as they try to swim away. According to legend, the Roman consul is recognized amidst the fighting, and the enraged Gauls fight to get to him. The consul's best troops rally to protect him, but one of the Gallic warriors fights his way through and thrusts his spear into the consul, killing him. Meanwhile, the Roman vanguard still stands firm. Once they realized that the battle is lost, they start fighting their way through Hannibal's heavy infantry, desperate to escape the field. But they too would be captured within a day or two after the battle. In less than 3 hours of fighting, a whole Roman army is virtually wiped out. It is said that Flaminius's body was torn to pieces by Gallic soldiers, so much so that Hannibal was not able to find any trace of the consul after the battle to give him a proper burial. Carthaginian losses, meanwhile, are minor. Large plunder is taken, especially military equipment. Hannibal re-equips his Libyan infantry, Each man is given a Roman mail, bronze helmet, and an oval scutum shield.
Okay, so that victory is nothing short of historic. Can you imagine the fact that they've... I mean, I don't even know what the army sizes were prior to battle. Did they have the same numbers there, almost? Or was there more Romans? I think there was more Romans, wasn't there? You think about it, with the losses that they sustained, each soldier could wear Roman armor and a Roman helmet. How insane would have that been? They suddenly all just put on Roman equipment.
Within a few days, the Romans suffer another disastrous loss. As Servilius was on the move to join Flaminius, he hurriedly sent all of his 4,000 cavalry ahead of the army to help his co-consul.
Oh no.
Hannibal learned of their movement even before Servilius knew about Flaminius's defeat. Maharbal, Hannibal's second in command, rode out to meet them, launching a surprise attack. Those who survived were captured. By eliminating Servilius's cavalry, Hannibal effectively neutralized his entire consular army. Few, if any, commanders have been able to match Hannibal's ambush at Lake Trazamine, where one entire army ambushed and effectively destroyed another entire army. The population in Rome fell into utter despair, as Lake Trazamine is not far, and it seems like there is nothing that can stop Hannibal from attacking the city, as Servilius has to withdraw back to Ariminum to counter the Gauls who, encouraged by Hannibal's presence, aggressively began raiding Roman territory. In this time of crisis, the Senate appoints a dictator, a certain Fabius Maximus, to coordinate the defense against Hannibal. Meanwhile, Hannibal makes preparations to press on, further into Italy.
And I think we'll call it there, guys. It has been fun. I'm really sad in a way that my Greek video didn't really come of anything. But for the most part, I really enjoy the Hannibal videos. We'll watch more Hannibal in future. More Second Punic War is definitely on the menu.